Hi, hey, I've had a chance now to look at your submissions for the haiku assignment, and as usual, you guys have done some incredible work. And mostly, I really want to compliment you on the thinking that went behind the images that you made. It's really been kind of top drawer to watch you interpret both those verses and apply them to an image that you've made. I just want to tell you in advance that if you do that with all of your photography, if when you look at the scene in front of you, think about what the words of that scene, the picture elements that are in it, can mean, what else they mean, what they can mean when you go beyond the literal, I promise you that your pictures will get more and more profound and more powerful to the viewer. With that said, let's now take a look at what you've turned in. We'll end up doing this in two parts to save a little bit of time and space on YouTube. Okay, here's our first example. This one is related to the poem about footprints becoming that of the sea. And at first, when I looked at it, before I read the rationale for it, I thought, yeah, this is a little literal. But the reasoning behind it really makes sense. The grandfather taking the grandson for a visit into the sea. Things are always changing. Things are being assimilated by the environment, by time, by life. And this really starts to make sense. So the first thing I would do to try to help this a little bit is I'd come up here and pick the ruler tool and straighten this. Run that line across the horizon. We'll straighten it. Now what we're going to have to do is fill in a little bit. We're going to have to crop some of this down. The problem is if I come down here to this lower part, if I crop across here, I'm going to potentially cut into his foot or so close to it that it's a problem. So before I do anything else, I'm going to take the clone tool, make it a smaller brush, and get rid of that. And I see I screwed that up a little bit. Okay, now I can crop these other sides without cutting seriously into a part of the picture that I would like to keep. Apologize for being a little spastic on this thing for some reason. Okay, we haven't taken enough away to seriously change the way this looks. And the other thing I would do, it's a little bright for me. I want to be concentrated on these individuals. So I'm going to darken the overall picture just a touch. And I'll do that by making a duplicate layer. I'll make it a multiply layer. And now I'm going to bring the opacity back. So I'm about halfway between the two. And there are a couple of things I want to lighten. So I'll turn it into a layer mask. I'll take my black brush to erase down to this lighter version. And all I'm going to do is use it to bring some of these shadows back on the faces and bring the detail back in his black t-shirt. And that makes the people stand out just a little more in this shot. It looks like when you made this, you did a similar thing and you created a halo around this leg. And that's going to need to be repaired. That's fortunately not that difficult to do. Let me flatten what we just did. And I'm going to clone this, but because it's a little tricky to blend light tones, I'm going to do it on an additional layer. And I'll make sure that when I do this, that I'm going to take all of the layers, the current layer and below. That means I can pick up on this lower layer, but still being applying it to this top layer. And I'm going to set this down maybe to 50%. Sometimes when you're trying to clone light areas, it really does want to darken things, and I don't know exactly why it'll do that sometimes. So I'm going to pick up here. You see how much darker that is? But it does it frequently. And so you have to really work at blending all of that together. Now I'm going to pick up again out here a little further, because what I want to do is come in here Now, it turns out I'm not sure I'm going to need to knock this back. See if I can blend some of this up into it. There we go. Now I can sort of get rid of that halo, which you should have done in the first place. Now, I don't know if I would want to darken this even more, to concentrate even more on it. If I did, then I would do it as a vignette. So let's test it just to see if it works. I'm going to flatten this image. I'll do the standard vignette thing. I'll make a duplicate layer, and I'm going to make it a multiply layer again. And this time I'm going to use a standard vignette. I'm going to pick up the rectangle tool, and because this is a low res image, I'm going to set the feather to 200 pixels. If this were higher res, I would set it to much more, but this will do for right now. It's not big enough. One more time. There we go. That'll be better. Now, I'll make this into a layer mask. And I'm going to invert the mask with Control-I. I should have feathered it just a little more. I can still sort of see the outline of that vignette. But as it is now, again, you can start to see we're adding depth to it. We're making the couple stand out more from the background. So let's do a snapshot of it and take a look at the difference. Here is our original, and there's our corrected view. Okay? Let's see what else we have. Well, once again, we have a delightful interpretation. This is of the leaf falling to the ground, becoming a butterfly. The young dancer in here is beautifully wrought in this. There are two things that I would do to this. One is I'd get rid of the power lines. Those really are distracting, especially this lighter colored one. And the other is, and this is something that isn't going to be properly fixed in editing. It may end up looking a little weird. But in shooting it, the way her body is turned, we're seeing a lot of the soles of her feet here. But the line along the outside of the foot, with her toe pointed down, can be a really pretty curve. So I would make sure that when she does this, I would turn her foot and her leg to where you're seeing just the profile. But we'll see if we can make it look a little bit better for this anyway. First thing I'm going to do is come along and grab the spot healing brush. Oh yeah, that's much better. made a slight bobble there that I should correct. Okay, we have a couple little places to fix. With that, I'll just clone out this. Except I'm going to need a bit more. And then I'm going to do this simply by erasing this part of her foot, but that's going to leave a somewhat distorted view. But hopefully you'll be able to tell how much smoother this would look. This is true of hands as well. This is really nice, seeing along the heel of that hand. It's a nice, smooth line. I would do the same here. To where you're just getting the shape of that foot, the linear shape of it. And I think that adds a lot to it. The sole of her foot kind of distracts from this. But otherwise, this is a very nice shot. The comment was made that it looked like the compression lost some of the tones in her skin. And that's true. It will do that, which is one of the reasons not to shoot in JPEG, which compresses things to begin with. Try to get all the tones possible. For times when you have to submit something compressed or made smaller, then you have to live with the results. But you want to start with the most tones possible. So you're right, it does lose some of those tones. Let's see what else we have. Okay. Now we have a really beautiful shot here that is of the poem talking about impermanence. A really interesting take on the poem where things are evaporating. And here we're talking about the land is evaporating under the constant attack of the water. Very clever take on it. And this is a really nice shot with the longer shutter speed to where you get a sense of this flow. The only thing I would do, and this is typical when you're shooting water, the reflections in water are frequently 1 to 2 stops darker than what it is they're reflecting. So here we see this darker water here, but the sky, very dramatic sky, but it's lighter. So what I'm going to do is darken that sky, and I'm going to do it again with our good old layer mask routine. So I'm going to make a duplicate, and I could use any of the tools, levels, curves, whatever, to darken it. To do this really simply, I'm just going to use our typical multiply layer, and that makes for a pretty dramatic sky. Now, we'll create the layer mask, use a black brush to bring this part back, and I want it to come back 100% to what it was. You know what I think would be easier? I'm going to stop right here, and we're going to go back to where we just added the layer mask. And now I'm going to invert that mask with a Control-I. I think it's going to be easier to brush in the sky. So I need to change the color, make a bigger brush. Oh yeah. Don't be afraid sometimes you'll start off down one path and realize that actually there is a much better way to do it. Don't be afraid to stop, back up to wherever you have to, and now make that change. Now I'm going to do this one more time, see if I can bring out a little bit more of the rocks here. So I'm going to take that by flattening this layer, make another layer mask, and another layer, and this time I'm going to use the screen. Oh yeah, there's some detail there. Not a lot, but some. And I'll take it. I'm going to make a layer mask. Again, I'm going to invert it because I have just a minor part to erase. My brush is already white from the last time, but I'm not going to want 100% here. I'm only going to want a little bit. Just to put some life in those shadows. Ansel Adams called shadows like that luminous shadows. And what he meant was shadows with some detail in them. I'm also going to lighten that wall just a touch. And I'm going to lighten along the top here to give us more of a sense of the light hitting this top area. Okay. And that, I think, will do it. Let's take a look how that compares. We'll make a snapshot. So there's where we are. There's where we started. This was another really interesting interpretation of things. In this case, I thought that this was one of those, footprint becoming that of the sea, but it's really talking about impermanence. It's talking about that first one, about dew evaporating. In this case, it's being lost in the as it slowly rots away and becomes part of the sea, this little dinghy. Again, a very, very interesting approach to that poem. The only thing I would do with this, I think it's perfect as a grayscale. The only thing I would do, again, is emphasize the boat, the subject, by vignetting some of this, the rest of the area here. So let's do that. We'll make our duplicate layer. We'll tell it we want to multiply. I'm going to try to soften this some more. The last one I did was 200 pixels. Let's make this 300. Aha. I can't do it with 300. I've got to do it with 200. Maybe 250. Still not. Wow. There we go. Now, we'll make a layer mask. We'll invert it. Very cool. The only thing I'm going to do is bring this interior back a little bit. Let me get a bigger brush. Oops, wrong brush. I want to be subtle with this, so I'm still leaving my brush at 30, in this case, what is it, 35, 38%? And I'm going to brighten these rocks in here just a little. So I'm going to take that, and since this is a black and white image, I'm going to do a very slight vignette, simply using black to darken it. I want to make this smaller so I've got a lot of room. One reason to use this full image, this circle, now I just want to use the edge of it. This is set to a very soft brush, no hardness at all. So, and I just want to use the edge of it to barely, slightly. May need a little more than that though. And I do need it to be normal. So that's too much. Let's back up. We'll set this down. There we go. Again, just to start to channel your eye into that boat. And there we go. That'll be our shot. Very nice. I'm going to end this as part 1. There are 4 more to go. And we'll do this in 2 parts to save some video space on the server with 2 different pieces. So I'll be back. Hang on.